All right. Good morning, NBC. If you're watching out there on social media, on Facebook, if you're up this early, we're doing an early recording today. Um, we are coming to the end of a very busy weekend at NBC, and I'm joined here by Pastor Dave. How's it going over there?
Good morning, Pastor Bob. Here we are in the beginning of April. Good to be with you today. I love your shirt.
Thank you. Yeah. So exciting news. We are heading down to pick up our son from the hospital today. He's coming home, so we're making a transition into a new season. And my wife had a friend make a few T-shirts for us today. So the "Not Today, Satan" is to let him know that I mean, you guys made this popular back with your father-in-law. Jesus is Lord, Jesus is King. And then we also branded it. So we got our Team Josiah shirts right here. So we're all gonna wear them when we go down. Actually, the really cool thing is that this is the first time all of our kids are going to be in the same room. So it's going to be kind of an emotional day, I think. I think from that perspective.
Wow.
But
Hey, we're celebrating with you. If you're watching this on social media, Bob, we're so happy for you guys. We're just, people get excited about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Tonight is the finals of the NCAA tournament. There's going to be people going wild for North Carolina or Kansas. This is something we can get excited about, man. The Lord is gracious. The Lord is good. This is a big day. So I got the victory sign for you, man. We're pulling for you.
There you go. Thank you,
King Josiah.
Well, yeah, and he's been through a lot, and he's toughed it through, and so we're just thanking the Lord for his provision.
Awesome.
So it's been good. Thank you all for your prayers. Speaking of, so we are coming to the end of our Cultivating the Christian Life series. We have one final week coming up. You're going to do a big wrap up, and there's going to be a reveal on our some vision stuff this coming Sunday. But as far as the rules, we finished up with rule number 12 yesterday, talking about multiplying and expanding, and you talked specifically about evangelism, and you took us back to the book of Acts. And I got to tell you, I don't know how many places you can go if you're talking about evangelism. Is there a better place to go than Acts chapter 17, taking us to Mars Hill? I mean, what other choices do you have?
There's a few classic passages that I like to use to teach on principles of evangelism and sharing. Yeah. That's one of them. Jesus's conversation with the woman at the well also provides a lot of practical insight in terms of having spiritual conversations, but that's a classic. And so it's always good to revisit such a powerful speech. Yeah,
for sure. And it's just, I think you use 7 principles to talk about how you go and you reach people, which was really good. One of the things that I've enjoyed over the last couple of years, just from a practical perspective, we did this class in the fall called Tactics by Greg Kokel, where he talks about using questions to really get at it kind of in a non-threatening way. You start to build a rapport with people and eventually get to talk with them about faith. I also have picked up this book recently by Randy Newman. It's called Questioning Evangelism, Engaging People's Hearts the Way Jesus Did. So really using the art of asking questions to get people thinking about why they believe what they believe. Because oftentimes you're dealing with worldview divides within our culture and people haven't thought through the implications of where they're standing.
Which I think questions is a great technique. Yeah. The human mind is built in such a way. Psychologists say that when we're asked a question, if we don't know the answer to it, we can't dismiss it. Our mind will keep coming back to it and rolling it over until we come up with some kind of answer. So, I mean, Jesus asked over 100 questions in the Gospels, and it's a great technique for sharing our faith. So I think that's a wonderful strategy.
Yeah. Another story that I came across recently was, you may know the name Nabil Qureshi, and he wrote this book called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. And his conversion story took place over multiple years with a friend he met in college who just kept asking him questions about his beliefs and his positions. And ultimately, it was the Holy Spirit that came in, opened his eyes. But it took, like a lot of times with people, you have to be patient. You have to keep going and developing those relationships and asking the tough questions. But in the passage yesterday, there was a few things that really that struck me. One of the things you were talking about when Paul comes in, very famously, it says the first thing you notice is he notices all the statues that are in the marketplace, and it says his heart is provoked, and you did a good job of describing what provoked meant. Like he was pretty, moved at this. And you asked us a question. You said, the statues you lift up show what you value. So maybe could you say a little bit more about that? What do you think are the things that we value in our culture, and maybe even in our own Christian lives, that we should be careful about?
Yeah, I mean, Paul was greatly distressed. The word there is kind of that of a spouse finding out that their spouse was committing adultery. I mean, it's a strong emotional reaction. And I don't know that we have that kind of visceral feeling all the time when we look around at the things that our culture lifts up. Maybe that's where we need to start, that we need to have the eyes of Paul as we look around and see those things in our culture that are taking too prominent of a place over and against the God who created us and who's worthy of our worship. Everybody is seeking happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction somewhere. We're just designed to worship and pour ourselves into something and sacrifice for something. The question is, what are we worshiping, and is that thing worthy of our worship? So, the obvious things are the sinful behaviors that everybody can see. The addictions, the alcoholism, the pornography, the lust, those types of sins and idols become really obvious to anybody on the street. What's more pernicious, I think, are those things that take a place in our heart that are sometimes good things, but then we turn them into ultimate things and they become idolatrous. And those are the things like financial security, how much is enough, our commitment to our family, to the point where we are prioritizing our relationship with them over and against our commitment to God, our looks, our appearance, even our work ethic. Sometimes we can struggle with workaholism. Here we are on Monday morning, and we want to put in more hours, and we will sacrifice for success at a job. We'll sacrifice our family. We will sacrifice things that are important, and obligations, that responsibilities that God has given us, because that success at work has become too important. And so those things that our culture lifts up as good and defines as successful, we're drawn towards those things, and our heart needs to be provoked and distressed when we see those idols, to the point where we need to share Christ, who's worthy of our affection and our worship.
Yeah. Hey, that's a great summary. And if you're watching on social media, I see a couple of people out there on Facebook. Maybe let us know, what are some of the statues that you see in our culture or in your own life that people or yourself tends to worship. So think pretty critically about that. One of the things I really got a chuckle about the how you handled the statue or the monument to the unknown God.
Yeah.
Put out there, like they were like, oh, and here's something just in case there's a God that shows up we hadn't thought about,
Right.
Which gives you a window into the superstitious nature of the culture in Athens at the time.
Right. And we make fun of them as if we don't also have our own superstitions in our culture, but we do. And there are things that we need to recognize that are in our hearts that we have uncertainty about, and that's a great opportunity to have an open door for a gospel conversation. How come you do this? Why are you wondering if this is appropriate? Why do you do this kind of just in case? And Paul says that's my entry point, and he found something that they weren't quite sure about, and also that they were admitting that they weren't quite sure about, and that was an open door of curiosity for him to bring the gospel into that situation. It says, I'm going to proclaim this to you and what the scripture has revealed. So it's pretty interesting technique he used.
It was. Now, the other thing you emphasized was the idea that Paul felt really called to these people, obviously, wherever Paul went on his missionary journeys. And I think with this conversation about idols and statues that capture our hearts, those are some of the things that create barriers in the process of reaching people for the gospel. So I guess maybe a second question, or what do you think are some of the biggest challenges in today's world in terms of reaching people with Christ, having spiritual conversations? What are the things that keep us from doing that? And then kind of the traps that are set for us in those conversations?
Yeah. The two big answers that are barriers for having evangelistic conversations are fear of rejection and not being equipped to be able to answer people's objections. Those are the two big barriers that we need to push through. And the only way to do that is to have the boldness and courage to start trying it out. And I think that the Lord will honor our efforts to do that. When we get into those conversations, there are other barriers. There's stereotypes about Christians that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
We have a branding issue. There's an accusation of hypocrisy that we're judgmental. There's all kinds of barriers that are out there when we face those conversations that we need to learn to answer well. But yet there's also opportunities that I think will come up our way when we talk to people in what I call the curious phases of life. Mm-hmm. There are times where you can throw a fishing line out there, a lure out there with some bait, and it'll hit in statistically more often ways, like when someone has a new baby. All of a sudden they start thinking about, wow, this is a new life. There's these new obligations I have. God is amazing. Or another time is later on in life when they have a teenager who rebels and they need answers and they're not sure how to handle that. Or another curious time in their life is when their parents die. And all of a sudden when our parents die, psychologists say that's when we get in touch with our own mortality. And that's when we want to know more about what's on the other side. Or sometimes, here's a weird one, we can talk to people when everything's going right. They get what they want, their dreams are realized, they got the home they wanted, the job that they wanted, and they still see that there's a void there. And they go, wow, I thought this was going to do it for me, but it doesn't do it for me. And then that's an opportunity to bring in the good news of the gospel, the living water of God. So break through those barriers, and I think you'll see opportunities to share in some powerful ways.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, you got us into 7 different strategies, and you mentioned one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, 1 Peter 3:15, which I think I mentioned last week. A couple ones that really stood out to me were the first piece, which a lot of people need to think through, is how do you develop social contact with people that don't believe, that don't follow Jesus. And I think that's a hard thing for people nowadays, because we live in a culture that is so hostile towards the gospel that a lot of Christians have a tendency to just say, you know what, I just want to be around people like me. I want to be encouraged and built up and have fellowship. And that's a good thing. But they're also, the whole point of this week is there also is a call to reach out to people that don't know Christ. So how do you develop social contact in order to just build relationships with people that think differently than you?
Right. Yeah, I like to ask the question, when you get on an airplane, which wing do you think is more important on this airplane? Well, it's a ridiculous question, right? We need both wings. We need relationships with believers and a band of brothers and sisters out there. And we also need to develop relationships with unbelievers and outsiders. So it's important for us to forge both of those kinds of relationships. And we can find common ground with them in a lot of different ways. Some of you guys, you work with unbelievers or you go to school with unbelievers. That's not hard for you. Others of us, like me and you, Bob, who work in an organization that's Christ-centered, it's actually more challenging to rub shoulders with unbelievers. So, you have to do that by forging relationships with people at your gym, or people at your on your child's sports team, other parents from your relationships, from your kids' relationships, or just having your own set of hobbies, a basketball league or a fishing club, or there's a lot of different creative ideas. Whatever you're interested in, that's your network and opportunity, your circles to think about. Who do you know that still needs to know the gospel? That's something to be intentional about as well.
Yeah. I certainly, I often think about how much easier it was for me to develop relationships with non-Christians when I worked at Starbucks back when I was in seminary, because that was just natural customers coming in, people I worked with. And you're right, when you work in the church, you have to work a lot harder to find those people and develop those relationships. My wife has done a great job at this over the last year or two. Just the Lord has brought a lot of people into our lives through the things that we're walking through with our son, networks we never thought we would be in, and she's developed quite a few relationships And so we're hoping that that'll bear fruit at some point.
That's
Excuse
great.
me.
And you know what? Don't think that it has to be always a long thing. Sometimes it can be a quick relationship. Colossians 4 says, be wise in the way you act toward outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. And that could be just looking out for momentary opportunities. So
Yeah.
you're surrounded by strangers. You got a Christian t-shirt on today, Bob. You just never know who might see that or who might interact with you in a short little conversation. I think it was Napoleon who said the reason we defeated the Austrians is because they never learned the value of 5 minutes. So it could be a simple 5-minute conversation that turns toward the gospel, even with somebody that you don't really know, and that could strike up a spiritual conversation. And who knows, God can use that as well. So could be short-term relationships or long-term relationships, but make the most of every opportunity.
Yeah. One of the things we're doing here at NBC in over the next year is developing something we're calling affinity groups, which is the purpose is to take some of the interests that people in our church might have and look to develop relationships with other people, whether it's, through a book club or through camping or through some kind of sport. Look for ways that you can find people that have a similar interest that you. And I think that goes along with your creating a common ground, point. At least in terms of interest, and that will hopefully get you into your later points about making Jesus the main issue. And you have to have boldness to do that, but you also have to have a I guess a door to get there.
Right.
Not everybody's really good at just walking up off the street and building a relationship in 5 minutes and then saying, "Do you know Jesus?"
Right.
That intimidates some people.
Yeah, it can be different. People have different styles of sharing the gospel. And so be yourself, make it natural, but don't be a slave to your own fears and inhibitions. And don't be ashamed of what you believe. But do allow God to use your own unique personality to help you understand how you would best be able to reach out. Some people are really good and bold before big crowds. Some people are really good one-on-one. Some people are very compassionate and they use their care and serving others to share their faith. Other people use writing. And so there's a lot of different ways you can be bold and be courageous and share the gospel. So let your own personality and gifting inform how you would do this and glorify God in that way.
The other interesting point you mentioned, I forget which point it was under, but you used the illustration of an illustration I love which was the Blockbuster Video illustration, which I was there every Friday night, and there was, like, you're right, it was like Starbucks. There was one on every corner back in the 90s. But your point was to say that different generations think differently about things, and that certainly plays itself out in evangelism in terms of how you interact and the type of barriers and questions you might ask somebody.
Yeah, so there can be like a generational barrier, and we have to make sure we're communicating our faith in such a way that makes sense to millennials, Gen Z, Alpha, even thinking about our language and doing a little homework in terms of what resonates and what are the right issues to bring up in those conversations will go a long way.
Well, speaking of Alpha, over the next year, we are looking at launching an Alpha group, which is a ministry that specifically creates spaces for people to invite friends that want to have spiritual conversations, and ultimately gets you into thinking about what does the Christian faith say. So at some point, we're going to have an informational meeting about that, probably in the fall. So be praying about where God's calling you to and who he's calling you to.
That's a good long term, and a short term is, hey, Easter's 2 weeks away. So there one person in your life that doesn't have a church home, that is disconnected either from God or from church, and who could use an invitation from you? And you just simply say, hey, got anywhere to go on Easter? Would love to have you sit next to me. Who's that person? Our challenge to you is to throw out the bait, throw out the fishing line, and see what God might do just through your simple boldness and courageous invitation to Easter coming up soon. So we got a lot of those opportunities in the near future and in the distant future. We're going to keep our eye on the vision and keep our eye on the people that need to know the Lord. That's what we're all about here at NBC.
There you go. Well, anything else you want to mention for this sermon, or a sneak peek at next week?
Yeah, thank you guys for engaging with this series. We're going to be wrapping it up on Palm Sunday, and it's just been a wonderful time together talking about spiritual formation and how the tree is God's ultimate object lesson for what he wants us to be like. And next week, we will wrap it up by focusing our attention on the Lord Jesus and how he is our ultimate example. And I'm not going to steal the thunder too much from the message, but we will look forward to concluding that next time. I hope you'll be there for another good word from the Lord. I know you'll be blessed by that.
All right. Well, the only other thing we want to mention, which is probably the only thing to mention at this point, is that Easter is a coming. Easter is very, very close around the corner. If you want to get some Easter lilies, you can order them here. Here's our Easter page. Go to the website. You can see all the different things that are coming up, the dates. We have the hair-raising egg party coming up this Saturday at 1 p.m. And then we're having April 10th is the Palm Sunday, which is the sermon you were just talking about. And then April 14th, Thursday, there's going to be a Monday, Thursday service where we're going to have the Last Supper. And we also are going to have some drama and good music. It's always a really moving, one of my favorite services of the year, a really moving service. And then, of course, Easter's happening on, April 17th at 9 and 10:45. As Dave just mentioned, invite some friends. We're hoping to pack it out. We've been encouraged by the amount of folks that have been coming to church the last month. It's felt like it's 2019 again, Pastor Dave. We're like going back in time, right? Waiting for Doc Brown to show up at some point.
I like your 80s references, man. Makes me feel like a kid again.
Date myself. There you go.
It's all good with me, man.
All right.
Have a great week, guys. Thank you so much.
God bless.